Armageddon, a world whose name is known across the Imperium. Armageddon, a world whose name has become a byword for war and destruction on a massive scale. Armageddon, where the fate of 1,000 worlds hangs in the balance.
Hi, I'm Ed, welcome to Minisodes. After playing through the 3 missions found in the Battle for Armageddon scenario pamphlet, you'd think I'd be done with this beleaguered Imperial world for now. Well, not quite, because last week I got my hands on this, The Battle for Armageddon, a board and counter game designed by Jervis Johnson. Released in 1992, this 2-player game is fought on a strategic scale, depicting the movement of millions of soldiers and years of bitter conflict. Each token represents huge formations, such as tank divisions, whole guard armies and Titan legios for the Imperials, or hordes of boys in Gretchen, Knobs and various war machines such as Gargants for the Orcs. Just one of these games is perhaps the equivalent of many thousands of games of Epic, or hundreds of thousands of games of 40k. Interestingly enough, the campaign background penned by Bill King in the game's rulebook is the same as the one printed in the 40k scenario booklet released the following year, although this later version is substantially abridged. Now, after playing 2 tightly contested games of this with James over the weekend, we were struck by how closely the events of King's narrative mirrored those of the game in pace, tone and perspective. This got us wondering if Bill King played or observed a game and then simply wrote it up for the background section of the rulebook. After all, Games Workshop has canonised the results of games before.
Space Crusade, the ultimate adventure game where you must use all your skill and weaponry.
Plasma gun! Dreadnought!
Massive armoured columns smashed through the thinly held Imperial border positions. War buggies raced across the blazing sands towards the human lines. A howling mass of green-faced devils overran the hard-pressed human defenders. By the flickering light of the Pallidus Mountains, as Mount Escatus itself erupted and lava bubbled and hissed down its slopes, man and orc fought and died. Gargants lumbered forward, dwarfing fleeing human warriors, myriad turrets spitting death. The orcs punched holes through the human lines and drove south. 2 tribes swept east of the Palladian range, heading towards Hades' hive. The remaining Orc tribes struck out west towards Port Hellsreach. Despite the protests of Princeps Mannheim, von Strab ordered his most powerful mobile forces to stem the tide. Von Strab screamed that he needed no help. Under oath to obey his overlord, Mannheim could say no more. He put on his best dress uniform, thanked his staff for their loyalty, said goodbye to his wife and children, and then climbed into his Titan, Steel Hammer. Following von Strab's orders, he led his legion against the strongest concentration of Orc forces, whilst the 1st Tank Division attempted to ambush another Orc force. Greatly outnumbered, the legion was cut down. Steel Hammer managed to destroy 3 Orc Gargants before it was blown to pieces. Mannheim refused to evacuate, instead preferring to take his crippled Titan right into the heart of the Orc formation as its reactor melted down. His crew chose to remain with him. Mannheim was posthumously awarded the Emperor's Star. Overwhelmed by sheer force of numbers and superior Orc firepower, the human forces were broken. The shattered remnants of human divisions fell back to establish a defensive line along the boiling river Styges in the west and by the rust-red banks of Diabolus in the east.
This is Hero Quest, the fantasy adventure game where winning means mastering the arts of combat.
I'll use my broadsword.
A few months ago, I posted a competition to mark 1,000 followers on Instagram. Legionnaire Minis was the winner and selected Gazgull for me to paint up and post to New Zealand. This was pretty intimidating considering the awesome quality of Legionnaire Minis' work. I mean, just look at that Land Raider Proteus. And the detail on the faces of these scouts. Phenomenal. Putting these thoughts to one side, I started by fishing Gaz out of a jar of acetone, which really is the cat's pajamas when it comes to stripping metal minis. I then hunted down any errant flash and mold lines. and drilled the barrel of his shooter. Satisfied that I'd tidied Gaz up as much as possible, I got to basing. I was using the 2nd edition Orc Codex cover as a reference, so I glued on some skulls which I trimmed down so they didn't pull focus or obscure any details. I carefully applied PVA to the remaining areas and gave him a dunk in my basing mix. With Gazgul based, it was time to get priming.
Not without me, not!
Oh, sorry, Makari, I didn't think you were coming.
Screen. It just doesn't have to be that way. Get into Games Workshop today and discover a world of interaction and creativity. At Games Workshop, you collect, paint, and build figures and scenes for face.
Oi, you stop that. If you so much as touch one of them, look at that! He's eating his breakfast!
Of their attack. Messages of hope from Hell's Reach were broadcast over the Comnet in Hades' hive. It was the people of Hell's Reach's darkest hour when the port finally fell. Defeat, when it came, arrived from a most unexpected quarter. Orc weird boys summoned a psychic storm. Waves of pain burst into the minds of the hive's defenders. Some went mad, some died of shock. The heads of some exploded. Under cover of this storm, the Orcs entered Hell's Reach and wiped out the defenders to the last man. When word of the fall of Hell's Reach reached Hades, Commissar Yarrick ordered an hour of silence, and then locked himself in the Emperor's chapel to pray. Some say the old man communed with the deity and found fresh inspiration. Those who knew him well say he wept. Gazgul himself arrived to supervise the siege of Hades. He had heard tales of bitter human resistance and thought he'd better oversee the defeat of Yarrick personally. For weeks, a long duel was fought out under the dreadful yellow sky. Gazgul tried every stratagem that Gork and Mork told him. He feinted assaults on one part of the hive while the main strength of his troops attacked elsewhere. He airdropped elite commando units onto the peaks of the hive spires and ordered them to seek entrance through the ventilation system. He ordered his mech boys to build him mighty siege engines, enormous towers with huge jackhammers, modified gargants with earth-moving blades and great scoops. The advantage of the beautiful weather we're having in the UK at the moment, I primed Gaz and Makari with Halford's Grey Primer and then a Zenithal spray of Wraithbone. I began by laying down some base coats. As Gaz is a goth, I focused on black and red as the primary colours for both minis. That said, Gaz has so many adornments, skulls, doodads, horns, stick bombs and bullets on him that there'll be plenty of interest to break up those colours. The skin was painted goblin green from Vallejo's game colour range. Once all of the base coats were done, I added a wash of Agrak's Earthshade to the red, bone and gunmetal areas. I then dry brushed the gunmetal areas to bring them back up. For the brassy, burnished areas, I painted over the gunmetal with snakebite leather contrast paint, a technique that I think works really well. In the west, a new wave of Orc reinforcements had arrived, and a massive push against Tartarus Hive began. The Imperial lines had been stripped bare in order to mount the ill-fated relief operation on Hades Hive, and the Orcs easily broke through and pushed on south to besiege Tartarus Hive. Gazgul himself took personal command of the assault and launched his last desperate attempt to win the war. For days everything hung in the balance. If the Orcs could take Tartarus, they could break the back of Imperial resistance, devastating the South's industrial base to the point where the war would become unwinnable. It looked for a while as if he might succeed as headlong assaults swept over the city. In a desperate gamble, Dante's men returned to their ships. The Space Marines descended by drop pod behind the main body of the Orc spearhead, cutting off an entire Orc tribe. Dante himself led an assault on Gazgul's headquarters, but the lightning raid failed to capture the Orc chieftain, who was touring the front lines at the time. Now the final and most bitter battle of the war began. The Orcs had nothing to lose. It was fight or die. With most of the highlights completed, I focused on the red, layering up the highlights with Evil Sun Scarlet and Dragon Bright Orange. I painted the bases Xandri Dust, and once that was dry, I gave them a generous wash of Agrax Earthshade. Lastly, I dry brushed them with a 50-50 mix of Screaming Skull and Xandri Dust. I then painted the Dark Angel's beaky helmet Caliban Green, then gradually mixed in highlights of Moot Green. Stop! Banner time! I photocopied a Goth banner from the War der Orc supplement for Rogue Trader, an awesome tome with some really inspirational background on the orcs. The big thing here with banner painting is patience. What you're seeing here took me a good 90 minutes or so. Also, full disclosure, I used a 0.3 ink pen for the checkered pattern. With the banner complete and the rims painted, Gazgal, Mogorak Thraka and Makari were ready for battle. I'm really pleased with these minis, and mainly because I was painting this for Legionnaire minis, so I didn't try anything new, I didn't take any risks, I just focused on the skills and techniques that I know well. Okay, it doesn't hold a candle up to his work, but I hope it brings Legionnaire minis some joy and was worth the wait. Time for a well-deserved lunch. Lauren kindly helped me box up the minis, and then we headed down into town to visit the local post office. I hope you enjoyed this minisode and found it different. I'm really enjoying the creative opportunities that this channel is providing me, and also the support and kindness from subscribers. Feel free to comment, like and subscribe to this video. I really value your support.